What I want to do in this video is demonstrate how I operate this Woodstock Soapstone Ideal Steel hybrid wood stove through a burn cycle. Being a hybrid, this stove has both catalytic technology via catalytic combustor as well as secondary air in the firebox to clean emissions. So when I'm setting this stove up with a load of wood to burn, the first thing I do is open the bypass and then open the air control all the way. Once I've done that, I give it a couple of seconds for the airflow and the draft to get going, and then I go ahead and open the door, and I then go into the firebox with my coal rake, and I rake the coals around, and I spend a little bit of time just sifting a few of the ashes down through the ash grate in the bottom of the firebox into the ash pan. Now, I only need to empty that ash pan every 2 to 3 days. My goal with that is just to make sure that it's not going to overflow or overfill so that I don't kind of have a mess when I take it out. And I find that 2 to 3 days, no issue. My ash pan is not overflowed or overfilled. So that works very well for me with my burn cycles. So after I've raked the coals, the next thing I do is I go ahead and I load the firebox. Now, how much wood I put in there kind of depends on how long I want it to burn, but usually I roughly fill the firebox and know that I'm going to get 10 to 14 hours out of the burn in the wood stove. Now, this stove has held coals for up to 24 hours. I've been able to take some kindling, blow a little bit in there, and get a fire going after 24 hours from embers that are remaining in the stove. Now, 14 hours, very, very easy. Just throw pieces of wood in there and it takes off. The reality is it's not heating significantly for that long or that amount of time. By around 12 hours, it's typically around 200 degrees at the stovetop and still plenty of coals in the firebox. And in fact, if you open the air control at that point, the stovetop will actually increase in temperature as those coals burn down. It'll go up to between 250 and 300 even after the stove's been burning for 12 hours just by opening that air control wide open. So firebox is filled, and then it's kind of a staged process or a stepwise process of getting the stove settled in to where it's ready for the long haul. And so the way I do that is I run it a little bit more like a non-catalytic stove than a catalytic stove. This being a hybrid, you can kind of go either way, but I like maintaining flame in the firebox. So usually what I do is I kind of let it rip wide open with the bypass open for a while. I watch the pipe temperatures. Usually when the pipe temperatures on my single wall stovepipe are up between 250 and 300 degrees or so is about when I take the air, move the air down to the halfway point, and then engage the catalyst by pulling the lever down. And so then I let things kind of settle in, reach an equilibrium, and then from there I back the air down slowly into where it's going to sit. Now, I like a low burn. I like maintaining secondary combustion in the top of the firebox, but not really seeing any flames on the wood. So I like making sure that I've got a hot enough fire that I pretty much keep that secondary combustion from beginning until when it extinguishes. With the catalyst, you can get, clean burning at cooler temperatures. I just like keeping it hot, making sure everything is burning cleanly. So once all that's settled in, catalyst is engaged, my stovepipe temperature will fall. That will usually hold steady right around 250 degrees for quite a long time. The stovetop temperature will rise, and usually the stovetop right next to the flue collar will cruise somewhere between 500 and 600, 650 degrees or so, and cruise there for quite a while as things burn down. After about 12 hours, 10, 12 hours, stovetop temperature is going to be 200 to 250 degrees. And as it cools down and as the fire progresses, if you want a little bit more heat out of it, the solution to that is just to open the air a little bit and invigorate those coals a little bit more, and then the stove will get hotter and produce more heat. Again, my burn times are pretty much reload. You can reload 12 to 14 hours, plenty of coals, easy restart. You can reload in less if you want to keep it hotter and produce more heat. And you can, in the shoulder seasons, I've done this now, I've had this stove for nearly a year in operation. In the shoulder seasons, I could load it at night, say 7 o'clock at night, let it burn overnight, and then 7 o'clock the next night, just with a little kindling and the embers that are left in the firebox, get it going again. So it performs very, very well in that regard. And I have not burned necessarily the best firewood. I've been feeding it a lot of cherry and red maple, which in terms of BTU content and density, they're not up there with the best of the best. I've got some better wood that I'm kind of saving for the middle of this winter, ash, red oak, and some sugar maple and some Norway maple. All of those are really high BTU woods. I'm saving those for midwinter so that I can kind of get the most and the best out of the stove at that point. I'm burning more of my red maple and cherry now. I like to have a mix just because that makes for a nice fire in my experience and in my opinion. This has shown how I run the Woodstock Soapstone Ideal Steel. Again, this is a hybrid wood stove. This is not the only way to operate this stove because it does have a catalyst. You don't necessarily have to keep it quite as hot and maintain flames in the firebox all the time, but I like to burn it as clean as I can. And having burned it all last winter, the chimney was dirty at the end of the season, but it was by no means dirty in a bad sense. It was kind of what you would expect from a stove that's burning well and burning clean. And that's good. And so if I can get away with that and just worrying about cleaning it once a year, burning 4 to 5 cords of firewood through it, that's great. That's just what I want and works very well for me. So overall, still very, very happy with this wood stove, and it performs very, very well. If you want a lot of heat out of it, you can get it. If you want it to last a really long time, it'll do that too. I'll close with just a couple more points. Number one, I pretty much always operate this stove with the air set below 1/4 open. The only exception to that is when I just put in, say, maybe 4 or 5 pieces and I want a little higher burn. I may run it at half open to get kind of that quick sort of burst of heat and to burn down some of the coals a little bit more. But otherwise, I'm always running this less than 1/4 air open, generally about 2 tick marks below the 1/4 open point. And this is how the fire looks. Next thing I'll say is this whole process to get this stove from, a hot reload to looking like this takes between 15 and 30 minutes in terms of watching and kind of backing it down slowly. And more often than not, it's more like 15 to 20 minutes, especially if I've got a really good bed of coals in here. Finally, it is the 3rd week of November. We've been having fires in the stove since the beginning of October in terms of overnight burns to take the edge off in the house. And I have not yet cleaned the glass during this season at all. The glass was cleaned to start the season, but I have not cleaned it since. So given the number of fires we've had, you can see how effective the air wash is and how effective it is keeping the fire hot with respect to keeping the glass clean and being able to have a nice fire for viewing. So with that, I'll wrap it up here. This is how I operate my Woodstock Soapstone Ideal Steel. It performs very well this way. You could run it a little bit more like a catalytic stove, where you kind of back and shut it down sooner and maybe don't have flame in the firebox. But I try to avoid that just because keeping it hot keeps everything nice and clean, and the glass is clean, and of course the stove is burning cleanly.